Can you explain what you set out to do from the beginning and what you decided to do?
So yesterday we started on looking at tasks and seeing where we wanted to look at third grade and setting up a problem where we could look at a task and look for understanding using these two standards here. There was a lot of thinking going on. We wanted to do something where it related to the students in third grade along with the students in our own schools. So we said, let's do basketball. So right away we started thinking, brainstorming. We looked at using the scoreboard. We looked at using the scores, but we wanted to look at the fractions that's involved in the setup of the problem. So we looked at that yesterday. I think we had a lot of stuff that we wanted to explain more of, and that's kind of where we're at with the today's work, the tasks leading into our end task.
Dorn, could you just say another word about the standard? Where did you find it, and what is the standard?
So we first were looking at the fraction part of it, and that was help me out with, is that number, operations, and fractions?
Okay, from the Common Core?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's kind of where we started from. We wanted to look at what the fraction of 1 over whatever, a number. So Casey and Sherwin were looking at scores. I mean, there was a lot of thinking going. There was a lot of thoughts, a lot of ideas. So we said, let's look at numbers. And then we looked at, again, we went from that standard and looking at the scores and looking at two individuals and seeing what their points scored were to the total of points for the team.
Oh, okay.
So
that's great.
Yeah.
And you used the names of actual teachers
Yes.
at the school?
Yeah,
Some of
we
you?
used
All right.
we used 2 classrooms.
Okay.
So actual students, yes, who were actually pretty good at the
Basketball
game of
players.
basketball.
This is something
So-
kids could really relate to, I think.
Right, and that was one of a goal for us to really create the interest into the problem that we created. Because, go ahead,
And
Noah.
that comes back to making math and using everyday situations that they would use that math in. And that's what we really wanted to emphasize on all of our tasks, is that we talked as third grade teachers and talked about what is it that our students would really make connections with.
Nice. So impressive.
And if we go back to the first task, if we start over here, our main focus in all tasks was this concept of equal groups. So in our first task, and what we did was we broke it down, we looked at our end task here, and we figured out what skills do they need in order for them to build up to being able to solve a multitask problem such as this. So we looked at the fact that they'll have to do multiplication, division, and then leading up to fractions, but also sticking with that concept of equal groups. So in multiplication, and the other thing that we had talked about and discussed was that we need to stick with word problems, because some of the feedback we got from some of the other students in our gallery walk was that this might be a little too lengthy, too much information here, but Nola and I were saying that a lot of the Common Core stuff or the SBA, the assessments have problems that are lengthy like that, and we want them to be able to sort through all that information and pick out the facts. So what we even did here was we underlined all the facts that students need to be able to solve problems. So what we did was we looked at multiplications, addition, distributive property here, and then using that as multiplication, but also identifying that you have 3 equal groups of 15 right here, then which later on, and then the other aspect of it was the writing portion of it. You can see that we modeled a lot of their writing to start off with.
Oh, that's an interesting thing. So these stepping stone tasks are intended to help the students to progress
Right.
to the last one that's more complicated.
Yes.
Thank you.
So here's our addition, and then obviously we use gum as a way for them to relate to the problem. Then over here we use more of a cultural friendly problem where we use, now where our focus is on division, and we related it to planting season and how in our Pueblo culture we have rows where we plant corn in. So we related the problem that now we have Nola, which is the teacher, and then we had myself on the first problem, Nola on the second problem here, and then we divided the rows, planting rows, into 6 rows. How many seeds will seeds will she need to plant each row? So that's our whole problem. We kind of did a little sentence starter here for them, and then they can fill in the rest here.
And if you look at that strategy that we used here, we used division by sharing. So that would be our model for them to be able to use that, strategy by division by sharing.
Well, when we got to the part where we're trying to think of culture related, we came up with the seeds because we thought, hey, let's bring it back to community and stuff. So we're thinking at 3rd grade level, they're experiencing gum chewing, so they know what comes in a package, and they have an idea. Maybe if they're from the village, they can plant, and so we tried to relate it to their interests or their ideas. That, even marbles. Even though girls don't play with marbles, but it just seems like it'll be fun to take some of those marbles from the boys. I said, yes, I have 8 of them.
Very authentic task for your
Right.
children. Nicely done.
And then our final task was focused on fractions. So we're actually breaking this problem here into one part rather than it being double, but it's similar to what they would face here in the end task. So we have a whole right here of 24, and they had to break it into into thirds. So all the equal group model that we were building them up to, students should be able to identify that the denominator right here, 1/3, means you have to break it into 3 parts. 24, they would start dividing it up into 3 equal groups evenly as they go and start progressing. And then once they've used up all 24 marbles, students should be able to identify that, okay, here's 2 out of the 3 groups, and then it's 1/3 plus 1/3, which is equal to 2/3, and then 8 plus 8 is 16, or 8 times 2, and it relates back to the first task that we did. So then students should be able to identify, here's Thorn's marbles, and then you're left with Phyllis, who won 1/3 of his collection here. And then the other part that it relates, it could be as simple as 24 divided by 3 equals 8. So it all intertwines with one another. So once they've been able to identify this problem as one part, then our thinking is that when they jump into this part, now they're doing this process, but with 2 problems now, and they're comparing fractions and then finally coming up with their final answer. But the last thing I want to point out is that at the bottom, we expect them to be able to answer their own question without any sentence starters or anything like that at that point.
So you may not be showing them these solutions at the bottom, but that's something that you're thinking about as the teachers, hoping to elicit your type of thinking.
Yeah, so these are basically all hypotheses right here of what we're
Oh,
thinking
okay.
that they're going to be able to generate.
I see.
And the images, they can look at using those mathematical models. We start looking into, when we were looking at task 1, I think we created that really quick. I mean, these guys thought that up really quick. And we were like, well, what about image? So we made sure that the image was included in the second task, the third task, and finally into the final task. So that was something that we learned in looking at our first task, going from the end task right away.
There was also something that you guys talked about in terms of culture and the types of food that you can use and some things that you can't put in there.
Yeah.
I remember working with the Navajos that snakes are
Owls.
and those types of things. So we don't have to talk about those things,
No.
but in terms of why not food?
When we try to bring it back to what our students know, I know just as Pueblo people in my Pueblo, we're not really allowed to use food and count it. So that was something that we had talked about in our group, and I think that's what's really important for a teacher to know who the students are that you're teaching, and what is going to be important to them. And so, and then we thought about the corn nuts and putting them on there, and I was like, and then we decided, no, we just need to go with the graph, the graphic, the picture.
One thing that I was going to bring up was how Nola was able to have this aha moment. So when we first developed the end task, she couldn't see how the Common Core standard pertained to this particular problem. But as we slowly started with the first task, second task, and third task, by the time we got to our third task, it like made sense to her, and she was like, I get it now. You know, I understand how all this relates back to this problem and how it fits, how it all intertwines together. And I thought that was awesome. And for her to actually do the hypothesis on her own, I even told her, as I would a student, okay, what would you do to solve this problem based off of what we've already learned so far? So I thought that was good.
And that kind of puts you back into your students', per se, shoes, like being able to show them those, the progression of their knowledge. And like, okay, yeah, you can relate things back to something they already know, that prior knowledge that we had talked about this morning, which was awesome, to be able to, oh yeah, okay, I see that now. And having those moments when students are going to be able to use that prior knowledge in problem solving, like we did for the end task.
I had a question. How did you feel when Phyllis went on your marbles?
It doesn't usually happen, but for this task, I understood the importance of it, so I went ahead and let it happen. Yeah.
It was a teaching
Yeah.
moment, right?
Yeah.
Thank you guys.